Hello dear health seeker, Inga from Health Origins here. So today I've got an exciting recipe experiment as requested by one of my viewers, Aneesa. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. So she was asking for a no-knead gluten-free bread. So I set myself this challenge and I looked through available recipes online. And a lot of them, especially on YouTube, they use Dutch oven for making one, but I do not have Dutch oven, and probably a lot of you don't have it either. So I thought, well, how can we make a gluten-free whole grain bread in the normal kind of metal tin that most people have? So I'm going to be experimenting and see if I can make it happen. And I found a really simple, and it seems like a good recipe from the channel and a website called Quali Food. So it seems like a very simple 4-ingredient recipe, or 5 if you count water. So let's try and see how it works. So here I've got the 4 ingredients plus the water that I'm gonna need for the bread. So this is 200 grams of gluten-free oats. Well, I don't use necessarily gluten-free because we're not trying to avoid gluten per se, but if you obviously gluten-free, so make sure you get gluten-free oats. And I've just milled those in my spice grinder, or you could use coffee grinder or even food processor to blend or mill the oats. Porridge oats to the flour consistency, or you could just get oat flour. And then, so this is 200 grams, and I'll put the description, all the ingredients and the amounts in the description below as well. And this is 350 grams of my homemade gluten-free flour mix, and I'm gonna link to that video for you as well in the card above and in the description below. So basically 200 grams of oat flour, 350 grams of the gluten-free flour. So you could use store-bought if you don't have your own gluten-free mixture. That'll work just fine. So mix the 2 flours together. And then I've got 2 teaspoons of salt. So that is quite a lot of salt for one loaf. In my opinion, but I'm just going with the recipe. I don't want to tinker with it at the minute. I might reduce it for next time I make it. I might reduce it for to like maybe 1.5 teaspoon of salt, but because obviously it's going to be a loaf, you're only going to eat a slice or 2 at a time, then that shouldn't be too bad. So I'm just mixing in with the salt, and then I've got 12 grams of dried yeast. So this is quick acting dried yeast, so it's about 1.5 packets, because you get like 7-gram packets. It did indicate 12 grams, so that's what I've weighed out. So I'm gonna just mix that in, and then I've got 600 ml warm water. The recipe did not say whether it should be cold or warm water, but obviously I know that warm water activates the yeast quicker, so I'm just gonna pour it in. So it's just barely warm water. So pour all 600 ml in. It will look like a wet dough initially, how the recipe was saying, but then when we leave it to rise, it will become kind of thicker. You know, it will absorb the water and the moisture. At the minute, it's very actually quite runny dough, I must say. Perhaps next time I might try with maybe, I don't know, 550 ml water, because this looks very wet. So, but it, you know, once it stands a bit, and then what I'm going to be using. So I'm going to be using a metal tin and lined with parchment paper, because that's what the guy was using in his recipe. He was using like a glass kind of oval shaped container with the lid. I could potentially put in mine, but because I want to bake it in that, I kind of want it to be that shape. So I'm gonna keep it in that, and then I'm gonna be placing in this roasting tin, because I've got a top for this roasting tin. So because when you leave it to rise, you want to put a lid on it so it doesn't dry out. So yeah, so that's what I'm going to be using, and I'm going to be using the same tin to actually put it in the oven and become like my Dutch oven, if you like. So we'll see how that works. So yeah, it's getting a little bit thicker, but it's still fairly fluid dough, I must say. So just want to get rid of any lumps or bumps that I can see, because I don't want any pockets of flour not mixed in. I find that the whisk helps me to get the most uniform texture out of this dough, so that's what I'm gonna use, just to get all them lumps and bumps out. So there you go, that looks pretty nice and uniform. So what I'm gonna do now, I'm just gonna pour it into my tin. So I poured it into my tin, and now I'm gonna leave this to rise for, the recipe says 4 hours, but I'm going to be putting the lid on, and I'm going to be putting it into my dehydrator, where I'll create kind of like 35 37 degrees temperature, so like quite warm. So hopefully it'll take half the time, so hopefully it'll be ready in about 2 hours, risen and kind of thickened out enough so that we can put it to bake. So on goes my lid, and it will go to rest and rise for at least a couple of hours, and then we'll check. So it's been about 2 hours with my bread, gluten-free, no-knead bread, and as you can see, lessons learned. My yeast in the dehydrator, where it was really warm, it's got too enthusiastic and it just spilled out the edges. So what I'm going to try and do, I'm going to try and scoop it back into the bread, and I'm going to leave it to rise at room temperature, or even in a colder room, because I've got like a utility room which is a little bit cooler, so maybe leave it for another couple of hours there and see how it behaves. So I decided, because this dough is just so liquid, I think he was using a different, well, I know he was using a different flour mix. This is obviously my homemade one, so it probably reacts differently, and I don't know if he was using a quick action yeast either. I think it was just a normal dried yeast. So I'm just going to add an extra half a cup of flour, since I can't take out the liquids. And I'm gonna just mix that in carefully. I know I'm gonna kill most of the bubbles here, but I'm gonna put it back in to rise and develop. Not in such a hot room anymore, just in the room temperature for another 2-3 hours, and let it rise. But I think it's just way too liquid at the minute. So I think this half a cup of flour will help it to be more like the dough that the original recipe had, because it was definitely not so liquid. So I ended up pouring it out of that tin and into this container, adding another quarter of a cup of flour. So altogether I've added 3/4 of a cup of flour, and I think it's not going to fit in that original tin I had. So I've lined this glass casserole dish, and I'm just gonna pour it in. It's much better consistency now. It's kind of looking, and I used the dough hooks, as you can see, just to briefly mix it up to make sure that there's no flour clumps anywhere, to make sure it's all mixed properly. And now I'm gonna just let it rise for probably about 2-3 hours, depending you know how quickly it rises. And I'm gonna just keep it at room temperature. I'm definitely not gonna be putting in the dehydrator warm anymore. Lessons learned. So hopefully this time it should just even it out. So hopefully this time it'll nicely rise, and then I'm gonna pop it in a hot roasting dish and bake it. So this bread has been rising for about an hour and a half, and it's actually come up to the top of my glass dish. So I think that has risen enough for my liking, and I have been preheating the oven on 250 degrees Celsius for the last hour and maybe 15 minutes, so it should be hot enough. And I'm gonna now take this out, and I'm gonna put that roasting tin in the oven for about 15-20 minutes to get it properly heated up, both the bottom and the lid. So it's kind of like a Dutch oven, if you like, but it's obviously a roasting tin. So I'm going to put that in, and because it's kind of almost to the top, it's risen to the very top, the bread, I'll not cover it with anything, or you could kind of lightly cover maybe with the parchment paper for it not to dry out. But because I'm just going to do it for 15 minutes or so, it should be okay to just left like that. So I'm going to heat this roasting tin up, and then we're going to put the bread very carefully. So when you handle it, be careful not to kind of dump it on the counter or in the oven. Just kind of be careful, because you don't want to deflate those nice bubbles that have developed inside that. So now I've got this roasting tin heated up for about 15 minutes. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to carefully place my bread. Try not to shake it too much. This is a little bit slippy. That's not the best Christmas whatever you call it, the mitts. So anyway, so I've placed that bread inside. Now we're gonna close the lid, and I'm gonna be putting it in the oven. And luckily I've got also a pizza stone in there. I don't know if you can see, I don't think you can see very well, but there's a pizza stone, so it's kind of keeping it even hotter and nicer in there. So I'm just placing the roasting tin on the stone, and I'm gonna be putting it in with the lid on for 30 minutes. And after that, we're gonna open the lid up and let the crust kind of harden for the next 15 to 30 minutes as well. So the temperature, it's still 250 at the minute. So it's been 30 minutes. Now I've just taken the lid off. I'm gonna keep on baking the bread on 230 now though, so I'll reduce it to 230 Celsius, and gonna continue baking it for another 15 to 30 minutes it says, but I think I'll do the 30 just to make sure it's fully cooked. And the bread is finally done. It's out. It's actually looking good, and the crumb is really hard here. Wow. So what we need to do is we need to take it out of the container, and we need to peel the paper off and let the underside cool down and not condense underneath, you know, not to get soggy. So I'm gonna try and flip this bread carefully, not to burn myself. Wow, it's looking pretty good, and the house was smelling pretty nice too. So that's it. So I'm gonna let that cool down for about 15-20 minutes, and then we're gonna try and cut into it and see what it's like. My bread has been resting overnight, so it's definitely cooled down. So it's looking pretty good. No soggy bottoms for sure. So let's see what it's like. So it's quite a bit of a crumb. And let's see what it's inside. Oh wow, look at this. Let me zoom that in for you. This is beautiful texture, isn't it? Oh, and it smells so divine. So let me cut another slice so that me and Mark can taste test it for you. Oh wow, this is beautiful. So, oh my goodness.
It smells so good.
It smells so divine, and wow. Oh, the texture, look at it. It's just perfect. Yeah. Let's give it a taste test.
Nice. It's crumbly, a little bit crumbly, isn't it?
There's got a crumb on the outside, but wow. It's
got a bit stuck to my teeth.
It's pretty good, guys, and it's pretty neutral. It is quite salty, right? Because I put 2 teaspoons of salt.
I'm not getting a lot of salt.
As the recipe indicated. I mean, it doesn't taste salty, but it kind of tasted a little bit. But it's so good because you could have it. We're gonna have it with cheese in a minute, with cashew cheese.
Are we?
But yeah, so you could have this either sweet or savoury. So it's pretty neutral, isn't it?
Yeah, I would go with that.
Definitely has harder crust because obviously, like I said, I left it out on the counter overnight. If you want your crusts softer, if you don't like a hard crust, then when you take it out of the oven, straight away brush it with a little bit of water, and that will evaporate the water, but it'll make the crust soft. So perhaps I'll do that next time if we're not out of crusts.
I like it.
It's good though. Yeah, it's good. So, and it's quite nice, and it's cooked through, and it's quite nice texture, like I say. So it's risen, you know, quite well. It's got these air bubbles inside. So altogether, a successful first attempt, even though it started a little bit wobbly, but it definitely worked in the end. Yeah.
That's good.
So a great,
I want some more.
a great gluten-free, whole grain, no knead bread, right, that anybody can enjoy. So if you like this video, if you're gonna give it a go, give us a thumbs up. And if you're new here, subscribe for more videos just like this, yes, and hit that bell notification button so that you get notified of new videos when they are released every Wednesday and every Saturday. And remember, guys, food is fuel.
So be mindful of what you put in your body.
Yeah.
Until next time.
Until next time.
Bye guys.